All right, we are here. My name's Michelle Ferris, and I'm here with Amber Hollingsworth, and we're going to talk about getting our loved one out of denial who is addicted or struggling with alcohol. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I know. I'm super jacked. Your channel is amazing. If any of you have not subscribed yet, you have to. It's called Put Down the Shovel, and it's everything you need to know about addiction and help with your loved ones and yourself. So
That's right. Yeah. Thank you.
it's
Thank you. Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how denial fits into addiction, because I think a lot of people get confused with this concept.
I actually think in my mind, there are different levels of denial. It makes me think about, I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Shrek, where he says ogres are like onions. There's like layers and layers. That's what denial is
Right.
like. And so there's like basic denial that people think about, which is like, I don't have a problem. You're crazy. Like it's you. Like I don't have a problem at all kind of denial. And then there's like, well, I got a problem, but it ain't that bad, you know? And then there's
Right.
like, well, okay, I got a problem, but I can't help it because I have to, because I have anxiety or I have ADD and this is just my only way of dealing with it. You know, there are all these different layers. And I think ultimately it's frustrating to see any of those layers. But in my mind, the last layer, I think is the hardest, which is where someone sort of peels that onion layers of denial back till they get to the point it's like, okay, I'm like an addict and I'm like so bad that I can't be helped. And it's like they accept it, but then they just like fully accept it too much where they just own it and then just act like it's just hopeless and they just sort of resign themselves to it. And that's a kind of denial, but it's a different kind. So they're really different kinds of denial, and there are different stages that people go through coming out of denial.
Do you think denial is conscious?
Mostly subconscious. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, I guess.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like some not and some yes. Now, the other thing too is the person, like the loved one, the family member, or some people call them codependents or whatever you want to call them.
Right.
They have denial too.
Yes. Yes.
And theirs is like, it's not really worse, but it's more like, it's more shocking to me. Although it's not worse, it's the same. It's just like you automatically expect them to get it, where you kind of like don't really expect the other person to get it, which isn't fair enough. But
yeah, well, the codependent rationale, right, is I'm not the one drinking. I'm rational, when really we're not rational because we're so consumed by the alcoholic we can't function very well. So
yes. And if this helps anybody feel better, you cannot live with someone who has an addiction and not be made crazy a little bit. Like you just can't. It's not possible. So it's not even a like, what's wrong with me or why am I attracted to them? It's literally the symptoms that go on with the family member is symptomatic of the addiction. Like you could tell me what a family member's doing, and I could tell you what's going on with the addiction with the person, because it's a symptom of the addiction. And
it's not personal.
No.
Yeah.
It'll affect me, and I'm trained years and years of training, and if I'm sitting in it long enough, I get sucked into it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So how can people help their loved one get out of denial?
Well, I think there are a few things you can do. The first thing you can do is try to assess to the best of your ability where they're at in their stages of change. And that's kind of like a clinical term.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. Basically what that means is like anytime someone's going to change something, whether it's addiction or maybe they're in a bad relationship or maybe they're in a bad job or whatever it is, and we've all done this. We've all go through these stages of change. Maybe we want to go on a diet. Maybe we want to be better with our spending, any problem. But this term came out of the work of addiction, but you can apply it anywhere. You're going to go through these stages. The first one is like that basic denial, like I talked about, like, I don't have a problem. I don't even know what you guys are talking about. Y'all are crazy. Like, it's y'all. And that the fancy word for that is called pre-contemplation. That's just the clinical word. And that's like before there's an awareness, because contemplation just means like thinking. So it's like a before awareness. Then people move into the contemplation stage, which is what I call bargaining. And it's where there's this like awareness that there's a problem, but there's either a minimization of how bad the problem is, or there's a minimization of what it's going to take to really change or fix that problem. It's like, well, maybe if I, for a codependent point of view, it's like, well, maybe if I'm just nicer to them. Maybe if I just don't do those things that bother them.
I just won't talk about it.
Make sure they have dinner and they're not hungry, and then they won't be grumpy.
Right.
Like, there's this sort of, like, I call it the bargaining. And that's the same thing that the addict goes through. And that is, that can be a really long stage. And for addiction, it looks something like, well, I have a problem, but I'm not like those alcoholics in AA. Or, like, well, I just need to cut it back. Usually some version of, I just need to cut it back somehow, which is like, if I just drink beer, not liquor, if I just use cocaine once a month when it's like pay week, if I just drink on the weekends, if I just whatever, it's some kind of like managing it is what they would call it, like in a 12-step. But it's a way of keeping it. Like, I don't want to completely let go of this.
Yeah.
I want to make it better. And people go through that stage until they like try everything they can think of. They try all the different things. And there's not really a way to get people to skip that stage, but there are some things you can do to kind of like speed it up. And believe it or not,
talk about that.
The thing you can do to get people to speed it up is the opposite of what you think. Here's what won't work. You're ridiculous. That's not going to work. If you drink 2, you're going to drink the whole bottle and it's going to be a mess. That's not going to work. I've tried it a bunch of times. Still occasionally try it. Doesn't work. But what you can do is say, when someone says something to you like, well, you know what? I wish I could just drink on special occasions. Or, if I could if I don't drink more than 3 beers, and I know I'm talking about alcohol here just because it's such a common example, but you can kind of like this to anything. If I could just do this and not that, it'd be all right. But what I would say to someone in session is I might say something like, you know what, you're right. Like, if you don't drink more than 3 beers, like, that's not a problem, right? Like, nothing. I mean, lots of people do that, which is true, right? The question is whether or not they can drink just 3 beers. But what you have to do is you have to kind of let people check all the boxes. And so the way I speed that up, when I'm working clients, what you could do with your own like loved one is just say, yeah, I think that is a good plan. Now, you can know in the back of your head, that's not going to work. But if you can let someone say it to you out loud and then try it out in the open, like not in secret, then it makes them have to check it off faster. Now, you're going to be frustrated because after they're going to have to do it a few times because they're going to say it, then they're going to mess up, but it's going to be like, well, that mess up only happened because this one special thing. Let me try it again. I'll do better this time. You'll do a couple.
So you're really,
yeah.
So you're really validating their efforts and hanging tight and being patient and not interjecting your own, you need to do it this way.
Right. Now, where you can get yourself in a mess as the loved one is you can get in denial and you can believe that that's going to work. And then when it doesn't work, you're going to be really mad. But if you don't get yourself into denial and you're coming at this like strategically, which is what I always talk about. So you got to be strategic. This is like a chess game. And you say, yeah, let's try that. I mean, that seems fair. Let's go with that. And for my client, I'll say, let's put that on your treatment plan. I like that. Let's make it official or whatever. Then what happens is then they're out in the open about it and they're talking with you about it. And they have to sort of acknowledge faster when it doesn't work. And it kind of just allows them to sort of check off all the different bargains. Yeah.
And I think it also...
If you're not in denial, you'll be happy when it doesn't work. Whereas when you're in denial and it doesn't work, you're just going to lose your mind and then you're going to blow it. And then you're going to say all the things I told you not to say. And then you're going to be stuck. And that slows it down.
Yeah. And I think it also, what you're talking about is it's a really powerful way to preserve the relationship because the codependent or the family member has tried so hard to control and change and cajole them into treatment. So what you're saying is really a gentle way to support and let them have their consequence of figuring out, is that really going to work for them?
Exactly.
Most likely it isn't.
Right. And for you to sort of, sorry about my dog. He doesn't stop. I can fix him. If for you to sort of hold your cool while that happens. And that's the hard part, because you got to know going in, it probably isn't going to work. Okay.
Right.
And the goal here is to let it not work fast. The goal isn't to get in denial with them and pretend it's going to work. I mean, kind of go with them, but in your own mind, no, it's not gonna. The worst thing that can happen in my mind is for it to work for like 3 or 4 weeks. And I'm like, oh my God. Because I know ultimately it won't, but when it does, it sort of cements it in harder for the person, which means we're going to go through this phase longer. So the goal is to figure out that probably these sort of old school recovery, we call it like a half measure. These half measures just aren't going to work.
Yeah. And the family member needs so much support in order to do that, because that's not easy. So how do you know what stage of change someone is in?
You can kind of tell just by the language that they're using to talk to you about it. Now, I guess the key there is if they're talking to you about it. So you have to have a decent enough relationship with someone that the subject itself is safe enough that they'll have some dialogue with you about it. Likely they're not going to want to talk about it a lot, but usually they'll make like a comment here or there. Like even if they say something to you like, yeah, I really need to cut it back. Or, you know what, I think I'm just gaining weight from all this drinking. Or, you know, they may say some statement to you that says that they get this problematic on some level, but maybe they don't get that it's problematic on like the big level completely. And if you listen for those statements, those are what we call change talk. Or like a young person might say something like, well, I know I'm going to have to take that drug screen to get that job, so I'm going to have to stop smoking for at least 3 weeks. And I'll say, okay, that's change talk. Now, it may not be what you want to hear them say, because you may be wanting them to hear them say, oh my gosh, I'm the biggest drug addict ever, and I'm never going to touch it again. And I'm just going to go to meetings 3 times a day, and I'm just going to do everything they tell me to do. They're not going to say that. So quit waiting for it.
So what would a response be if you're the family member?
To one of those like intermediate kind of change talks, I would encourage it. I would say, I really like that you're paying attention to that. I would sort of validate. I would like, yeah, I think you're kind of right. It's pretty mature. It's smart of you. I think it might help you a lot. So I would go with it, even if you think it's not all the way there where you want them to be. This is how you get them from where they are to the next step and to the next. And it's as family, we just want to skip it all, even as counselors.
Oh, sure.
I just want to skip it all too.
Well, we want to shove. It's like, come on, let's get going here. I'm done.
Yes.
But that's where the support comes in, I think, because, you know, it really takes a village for the codependent to stay in recovery as much as it does the addict. But I love your approach of really just being able to hang in there with that change talk.
Yeah, and I think it's easier for you when you know that it's strategic and you're honest with yourself about what the goal is. The goal isn't to go from, I think I should cut it back, to that I'm never going to use again. The goal is to go from that to this, to this, to this. And that's how we get there, to move step by step in that direction. And there's just not a way to get there until you let them try all the things that they think might work. And probably, to be honest, try it more than once. And then eventually they will come to the conclusion, like, this just doesn't work.
Yeah. And what do you think the longest stage typically is for an addict or alcoholic person? I would pre-contemplation, or?
I would probably say that it's actually the contemplation stage. It's that bargaining stage. Because they're going to be in that bargaining stage before you know it. Like, they're going to be thinking it before they're going to admit it out loud to someone else. Like, even pretty early on in addiction, people will sort of go overboard with something, and they'll be like, in their own mind, they'll be like, you know what, I shouldn't have done that. And they'll kind of try this reining it back a little bit at a time before they ever admit it to you.
Yeah, I do notice that with my clients, that it really, when they're in those first 2 stages, it really takes a while for them. And then sometimes they just literally, they have one thing happen and they're like, okay, I'm there. But, you know, it takes a lot of work to get there.
Yes.
So how do you know if you're enabling versus helping?
Well, I kind of have like a formula, I call it, for that, to figure it out. So I'm not like a lot of people that are in the sort of addiction recovery world, they just like focus solely on like money or if you let them live with you or something like that. And sure, those things can be enabling, but there's a couple of things about it. I'm not just like gung ho, like you can't give them $5. I'm like, $5 never made or break anybody's addiction. Like I'm not advocating you go give someone $1,000 a week or something. I'm just saying like, as the loved one, you're stressing yourself out thinking, oh my gosh, like I bought them some warm socks. Like, am I enabling? Come on. You're not. Or even if you are, you're not enough to worry about. So don't stress about it. So there's that. But ultimately, my formula for figuring it out is if someone is helping themselves, they take a step, you can take a step. If they take 10 steps, you can take 10 steps. Because when you do that, that's called helping. And you're going to feel good about it. Because when you help someone, you feel really good about yourself.
Right.
It's just a natural human instinct. But when you're taking more steps than someone else is taking, you end up with resentment and you feel angry about it. Or you feel like you're having to do things that you didn't want to do. Like I'm having to pay their bills. I'm having to pay their electric bill. I'm having to take care of their kids and I don't want to. It's like you feel like you have to, but you didn't want to. That's probably when you're an enabling point. And you're going to know it because you're going to feel bad about it. You're going to feel shame about it or guilt about it or angry about it or resentful about it. You're not going to have a good feeling. Whereas when you help, you have a good feeling. So you can kind of do like a temperature check inside if you want that. So there's not one thing or another that counts. It's why are you doing it and how did you feel about doing it? That's your age.
So what would you recommend to the family when their loved one is nowhere near even the pre-contemplation? They're just, I'm good, everything's fine, I don't have a problem, and there's no opening at all.
Right. Well, when you're in that stage, you have to sort of do a few things simultaneously. The first thing you have to do is put boundaries in place to protect yourself. So like, let's say if this is your husband and they're in that stage and they control all the money or the bank account, or they get really intoxicated and unsafe for the kids, you kind of have to put safety first. So safety always comes before anything I will tell you or anyone else will tell you. You deal with that, right? First. Absolutely. And then after that is kind of decent, then you want to try and maintain your relationship with them as best as possible, which is easier to do when you have healthy boundaries because you're not angry, because you're not doing a bunch of things you didn't want to do. So it's easier to pull off when you have those healthy boundaries. Because ultimately the relationship you have with someone is the change agent. That is your leverage, that is your currency, and that is the thing that you have that's the most valuable thing. So trying to sort of do that and not interfere with the consequences as much as you can. Because what you want to do is you want to stay out of the role where it's like you're fixing the problems they're creating, but you're mad at them inside the relationship, which is what typically happens. Right. You're going to pay your electric bill this time, but I'm telling you I'm sick of it and I'm not doing it again. And then you're yelling and you're nagging. That's the opposite. You want to let the consequence roll and keep the relationship good. That's how you're going to get someone to move from pre-contemplation to contemplation.
I love that. I love that. So what do you do when somebody relapses? What would the family do?
When someone relapses, your job is what I call not to get on the roller coaster with them. So just because they relapse doesn't mean you relapse. You hold with all these things that you're learning from Michelle and from me, and you stick with your plan. And if you don't get on the roller coaster with them, they'll get off faster. So your job is to hold your steady and do exactly what you've been doing and what you're trying to do. And you just have to go into fire drill mode and you have to get your head straight and you just keep moving along. Don't get sucked back into screaming, yelling, threatening, nagging, punishing. Do not. And that's going to be your instinct because it's going to freak you out when they relapse, because in your mind, it's going to be like, I cannot do this again. I'm not going through this. That was horrible. Right. It's almost worse than the first time. The relapse is worse than when it initially happened, because it
Yeah.
finally got better and your hopes are up, and you're kind of out of it, so you can see how crazy it really even was. So you're just like, your job is, you're not going to do that again regardless. You're not going back. And in most cases, if you hold your steady, their relapse will really be shortened. They'll come off of that roller coaster a lot faster if you don't get on with them. And even if they don't, you're still going to be okay.
And do you notice that the families that do Al-Anon or CODA or have some form of support are able to do that better?
I think so, because it's just like someone who's in recovery themselves. It helps you hold your steady. It helps you keep your thinking straight. It's kind of like a compass, because without it, it's just so easy to kind of like slide back to our norm and our baseline, that it helps us to keep those changes in place that maybe aren't, we haven't practiced those changes as long as we practice the other bad behaviors or non-effective behaviors. Super counseling about it.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I do think the family members tend to get gaslit a lot, and then that triggers their own self-doubt of, well, maybe I am crazy. Maybe this problem isn't that big a deal. What would you say to that?
Well, there's a couple of things going on there. You're talking about, like, if someone relapses, what will happen is they'll go backwards in their stages of change. So they may have told you last week that they know they can't manage this or that. They don't need to ever do it again. They need to go to meetings. They'll say all these things, which they totally believe. And then a week later, they're in relapse, and it's like they take it all back. And what's happening is they're going to try to convince you of that.
Right.
And your job is to do just like before when they were in the bargaining stage. I want you to go right back to what you did then, which is you're going to sort of allow them the room to do that without you having to buy into it, and understand that it's just them stepping back in their stages of change. But it doesn't mean they have to start all over, because it won't work pretty quickly if it's true addiction, and they'll figure that out pretty quick. You don't get in it with them.
Right. Yeah. Well, no, that's where what you're talking about is so important with the boundaries, because you have to be able to recognize it as the disease of addiction, not, oh my gosh, I'm going to get hooked again. And they're, what they're telling me is actually right about me. Because I think part of where I see so many of my clients get messed up is that they get blamed, right, by the alcoholic, because if I can tag you're it as the addict and say, hey, you're the nag, you're the this, you're the that, then I'm good. And they're not doing that because they're bad. They're doing that because they want the focus off the addiction. Do you see that a lot too?
Oh, definitely. It's always your fault.
Yeah.
And the thing of it is like, they'll say all these things to you, you're just so controlling, you're just so negative all the time, you just bring up my past. And the thing of it is it may not be true, but when they say that to you, guess what you do? You get negative, you get controlling, and you bring up their past. And so what happens is you let them turn you into those things if you're not careful. And then it's like you're proving their theory for them. See, I told you. And so the goal is to sort of hold your steady.
So I'm going to switch topic a little bit, same around recovery, but I loved in one of your videos, you talked about when the addict or alcoholic is willing to get help, and to talk about I love how you talked about what role the family member can have in finding those resources instead of the old school, you got to figure it out, when really, can you speak to that? Because I think that's so valuable.
Yes. You're going to hear a lot of people that will tell you, like, well, they need to figure that out for themselves, as in, like, they need to call the treatment centers, they need to find out from their insurance, this and that. And that sounds well and good, but the truth of it is if this person is really like in active addiction, there's two things. One thing is they're not capable of it, because even as somebody who works in this field, it's literally the most pain in the butt thing that I do is try to find somebody resources, making all these phone calls, checking with insurance. It drives me crazy. And I know people, like I have people I can call and stuff. I'm not even just like starting from total scratch. Right. And so if you're taking someone in an addicted state, it usually takes like days or weeks to figure all that out. So one is they're not capable of being stable long enough to do that. which is why they need the treatment. If they're stable long enough to do that, they probably don't even need to go to the big time treatment. So there's that. And then the other thing of it is that their little window, I call it your window of clarity there, isn't going to stay open long enough to get it done, even if they could do it. Because that little window of openness to do something different is probably going to stay open for a few hours to like a couple of days max. So I encourage family members to have done a lot of research and have a bunch of options ready for when the person does say it. And then what you want to say is not, okay, you're going to go here, but very calmly, casually, you can say, well, I think you might be right. Actually, I heard about these couple of places. Like, here's some information. Does either one of those sound good? And then kind of give them some choices and let them pick. Would you like for me to call and find out some more? What else would you like to know about them? You do the legwork. Now, ultimately, if they're going to go like into a treatment center or something, that treatment center's not going to like accept them until they talk to them. But you call the insurance. You do all that. I know that like a lot of codependency people might tell you like don't do that, but if you're dealing with an addicted loved one, it's not going to happen unless you do.
No, I absolutely agree. Because I think part of what we forget as the codependent person is that we're not the one physically addicted, so we're not impaired. So in our logical mind, we think, well, just make the call. But the alcoholic is like, they're looking through life using, and it's really tough. They're
scared and they don't want to do it anyway, and they want to back out anyway. And if you even if they said they'll do the call, say, I'll do it for you. I'll get all. I'll do because they're going to call, and the person on the other end of the phone is going to say one thing they don't like, and it's going to give them one reason to not do it. And they're looking for it. So if it's like I don't know, you can't take your laptop with you or something, then they're looking for a reason. So I suggest that the family members do the legwork. Ultimately, you want to give them some choices and let them pick, and they will have to get on the phone, but don't make them call insurance and ask questions about inpatient versus residential versus PHP. That's just exhausting. And they're not going to have the tolerance to do it.
Right. Even for us, it's hard to do that, like you said. So to expect someone who's impaired, and we have to remember that impairment is going to impact how much they can do and how patient they're going to be on the phone. I mean, you're right. It takes a ton of patience and thought process to do that.
And you'll know that when you start to try to do that, you'll know what I'm saying, because you'll make several of those calls and you'll just be like, well, now I want to drink or whatever. So you'll know why. And do it now, even if they're in pre-contemplation, because you want to have some options lined up, hopefully before that day, because you really don't know when that's going to happen. And it can feel like it drags on forever, and then it happens. And then when I love that, you got to be ready, because the window isn't long. So you do not want to start making those phone calls right then, because you'll miss your window.
Right. I know we're going to wrap up soon, but can you talk a little bit about the importance of the codependent getting into their recovery?
Yes. The thing about it is like I said, when you're living with addiction, it will make you crazy. It doesn't matter who you are. It's not personal. Right. It's the nature of it. And you can't, because it's so irrational. And if you're living with someone so irrational, you just, it's like, and it draws you, makes you be a person you don't want to be anymore. And then you feel this terrible mixed up mess of resentment, anger, sadness, fear, and all of those emotions are controlling your life, which isn't fair to you. So you got to do it number one for you. And if you're super codependent and you're like, but I just want them to get better, then you need to get it under control for them if you can't do it for you, because they can't get better until you get better. And the chances that they'll get better go way up when the family gets better.
See, that's what they need to hear, because so much of the time it's almost like the codependent bottom takes longer sometimes, because they're so focused on getting the alcoholic help that they don't see the need for themselves. So I really appreciate your talking about that.
So you have to do it, because otherwise if you don't, the things you're going to do because of all those emotions you have are going to make it worse for them, and it's going to prolong it. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I wanted to see if there were any questions. There's Star that had a few comments. Let's see. My AH has never, can you read that?
Yes, I
as
can. It
much
says
as I'd
mine.
like to get. Okay, I'm not sure how I would know how to navigate sobriety and relapse. Do you want to
Okay.
speak to that?
Yeah, so Star is saying my, I think that stands for alcoholic husband or addicted husband has never abstained from drinking. As much as I'd like to have him get free, I'm not sure I would know how to navigate sobriety and relapse. I'm confident in navigating active alcoholism.
Mm-hmm.
And that's such an important statement, Star, because it's your norm for so long. You know how to deal with that. And and for you and for them, it can be scary of like, well, what will happen when it's different? So what I would say to that is I would say you got to take that one step at a time, just like they do. And instead of worrying so much, like, well, I might fall apart if they got sober. It's kind of like, okay, well, let's get to here. And when we get to here, then we'll figure out how to get to there and there. And when you have that help, when you have someone sort of walking alongside of you, whether it's a codependency coach, an addiction counselor, a sponsor, whoever that is, they can help you figure it out. But strategically, you just want to focus on being a few steps ahead, not 100 steps ahead, because things can change so fast. It's no sense of getting 100 steps ahead. I like to say 5 steps ahead and you're good.
Yeah, I love that. And I recommend Al-Anon so much of the time because it really is helpful to get that support and now with the pandemic, I mean, gosh, you can find a meeting anytime, anywhere, which is just really great because you never know when you'll need it. So this has been so lovely. I have just so appreciated you coming in. So where can people find you?
Well, the best place to find me is probably on YouTube. The channel is called Put the Shovel Down. And some people don't get that reference, but it's an old recovery saying, and it stands for you hit your bottom when you put your shovel down. Because I don't believe that people have to hit bottom and lose everything. I'm like, you can decide whenever it is, you set it down and we're done. So that's what that means. Hopefully I hope you remember it. And you can find me on my website if you want to, which is familyrecoveryacademy.online, which I think Michelle has on the little banner here.
I do. And, for anyone listening to this, if you are having any struggles with addiction with a family member or codependency, your channel is so robust and the playlists are so interesting. I've learned so much myself in listening and watching your videos. So it's definitely a must subscribe for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the what do I want to call it? A reference there. And I think I did forget to mention, I gave Michelle the link to download a free PDF that will give you examples of change talk. And she put it here in the comments for you. I think it's in the description as well. So if you want to download that, so you get more of those examples of when you hear this, do this, that kind of thing, you can get it there.
That's great. And I noticed on your website, you have a lot of free resources on different things. So be sure to check that out. It's a wonderful resource. Thank you so much. This has been really helpful for my subscribers.
But thanks for having me.
Yay.
All right, bye, everybody.
Bye.